The first Turkish president, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, 1923 to 1938. Part 4. Ataturk dealt with the translation of scientific terminology into Turkish. He wanted the Turkish language reform to be methodologically based. Any attempt to cleanse the Turkish language of foreign influence without modeling the integral structure of the language was inherently wrong to him. He personally oversaw the development of the Sun language theory Günz dil teorisi, which was a linguistic theory which proposed that all human languages were descendants of one Central Asian primal language. His ideas could be traced to the work by the French scientist Hilaire de Barenton titled L'origine des langues, des religions et des peuples, which postulates that all languages originated from hieroglyphs and cuneiform used by Sumerians, and the paper by Austrian linguist Hermann F. Kverjik of Vienna titled La psychologie de quelques éléments des langues turques, the psychology of some elements of the Turkic languages. Ataturk formally introduced the Sun language theory into Turkish political and educational circles in 1935, although he did later correct the more extremist practices. Safet Arakan, a politician who was the head of the Turkish Language Association, said Ulu Önderimiz Ataturk Mustafa Kemal, our great leader Ataturk Mustafa Kemal, in the opening speech of the Second Language Day on the 26th of September 1934. Later, the surname Ataturk, father of the Turks, was accepted as the surname of Mustafa Kemal after the adoption of the surname law in 1934. Beginning in 1932, several hundred people's houses, halkevleri, and people's rooms, halkadaleri, across the country allowed greater access to a wide variety of artistic activities, sports, and other cultural events. Ataturk supported and encouraged the visual and the plastic arts, which had been suppressed by Ottoman leaders, who regarded depiction of the human form as idolatry. Many museums opened, architecture began to follow modern trends, and classical Western music, opera, ballet, and theater took greater hold in the country. Book and magazine publications increased as well, and the film industry began to grow. Almost all Qur'ans in Turkey before the 1930s were printed in Old Arabic. However, in 1924, 3 Turkish translations of the Quran were published in Istanbul, and several renderings of the Quran in the Turkish language were read in front of the public, creating significant controversy. These Turkish Qurans were fiercely opposed by members of the religious community, and the incident impelled many leading Muslim modernists to call upon the Turkish parliament to sponsor a Quran translation of suitable quality. With the support of Ataturk, the parliament approved the project, and the Directorate of Religious Affairs appointed Mehmet Akif Ersoy to compose a Quran translation, and the Islamic scholar El-Malili Hamdi Yazir to author a Turkish-language Quranic commentary tafsir titled Hak Dini Quran Dili, the Quran, the tongue of the religion of truth. However, it was only in 1935 that the version of Yazir's work read in public found its way to print. In 1932, Ataturk justified the translation of the Quran by stating how he wanted to teach religion in Turkish to Turkish people who had been practicing Islam without understanding it for centuries. Ataturk believed that the understanding of religion and its texts was too important to be left to a small group of people. Thus, his objective was to make the Quran accessible to a broader demographic by translating it into modern languages. In 1934, Ataturk commissioned the first Turkish operatic work, Azsoy. The opera, staged at the People's House in Ankara, was composed by Adnan Saygun and performed by soprano Semiha Berksoy. On the 5th of December 1934, Turkey moved to grant full political rights to women. The equal rights of women in marriage had already been established in the earlier Turkish civil code. The role of women in Ataturk's cultural reforms was expressed in the civic book prepared under his supervision. In it, he stated, "There is no logical explanation for the political disenfranchisement of women. Any hesitation and negative mentality on this subject is nothing more than a fading social phenomenon of the past. Women must have the right to vote and to be elected, because democracy dictates that, because there are interests that women must defend, and because there are social duties that women must perform." The 1935 general elections yielded 18 female MPs out of a total of 395 representatives, compared to 9 out of 615 members in the British House of Commons and 6 out of 435 in the U.S. House of Representatives inaugurated that year. When the modern Republic of Turkey was founded in 1923, nationalism and secularism were two of the founding principles. Ataturk aimed to create a nation-state ulus devlet from the Turkish remnants of the Ottoman Empire. Kemalism defines the Turkish people as those who protect and promote the moral, spiritual, cultural and humanistic values of the Turkish nation. One of the goals of the establishment of the new Turkish state was to ensure the domination of Turkish national identity in every aspect of social life, from the language that people speak in the streets to the language to be taught at schools, from the education to the industrial life, from the trade to the cadres of state officials, from the civil law to the settlement of citizens to particular regions. The process of unification through Turkification continued and was fostered under Ataturk's government with such policies as Citizens Speak Turkish, Vatandaş Türkçe Konuş, an initiative created in the 1930s by law students but sponsored by the government. This campaign aimed to put pressure on non-Turkish speakers to speak Turkish in public. However, the campaign went beyond the measures of a mere policy of speaking Turkish to an outright prevention of any other language. Another example of nationalization was the surname law, which obligated the Turkish people to adopt fixed, hereditary surnames and forbade names that contained connotations of foreign cultures, nations, tribes, and religions. As a result, many ethnic Armenians, Greeks, and Kurds changed their surnames. Non-Turkish surnames ending with yan, of, ef, vik, is, dis, pulos, aki, zaid, shvili, madumu, veld, bin could not be registered and were replaced by olu. Furthermore, the Geographical Name Changes initiative by the Turkish government replaced non-Turkish geographical and topographic names within the Turkish Republic with Turkish names. The main proponent of the initiative had been a Turkish homogenization social engineering campaign which aimed to assimilate geographical or topographical names that were deemed foreign and divisive against Turkish unity. The names that were considered foreign were usually of Armenian, Greek, Laz, Bulgarian, Kurdish, Assyrian, or Arabic origin. The 1934 resettlement law was a policy adopted by the Turkish government which set forth the basic principles of immigration. The law, however, is regarded by some as a policy of assimilation of non-Turkish minorities through a forced and collective resettlement. Ataturk was also credited for his transformational change in Turkish agriculture and ecological development. The Kemalist government planted 4 million trees, modernized the Turkish agricultural mechanism, implemented flood controls, opened schools in rural areas with rural institutions such as agricultural banks, and implemented land reform that removed heavy taxes on peasants of the Ottoman era. He was described as the father of Turkish agriculture. Ataturk also massively boomed the Turkish economy with heavy industrial production increased by 150% and GDP per capita rose from $800 to around $2,000 by late 1930s, on par with Japan. Ataturk's regime also passed the 1936 labor law, which gave substantial wage increases and improved the working conditions of workers in Turkish enterprises. Ataturk's foreign policy followed his motto, "Peace at home, peace in the world," a perception of peace linked to his project of civilization and modernization. The outcomes of Ataturk's policies depended on the power of the parliamentary sovereignty established by the Republic. The Turkish War of Independence was the last time Ataturk used his military might in dealing with other countries. Foreign issues were resolved by peaceful methods during his presidency. The issue of Mosul, a dispute with the United Kingdom over control of Mosul Vilayet, was one of the first foreign affairs-related controversies of the new republic. During the Mesopotamian campaign, Lieutenant General William Marshall followed the British War Office's instruction that every effort was to be made to score as heavily as possible on the Tigris before the whistle blew, capturing Mosul 3 days after the signature of the Armistice of Mudros, the 30th of October 1918. In 1920, the Misak-i which consolidated the Turkish lands, declared that Mosul Vilayet was a part of the historic Turkish heartland. The British were in a precarious situation with the issue of Mosul and were adopting almost equally desperate measures to protect their interests. For example, the Iraqi revolt against the British was suppressed by the RAF Iraq Command during the summer of 1920. From the British perspective, if Ataturk stabilized Turkey, he would then turn his attention to Mosul and penetrate Mesopotamia, where the native population would likely join his cause. Such an event would result in an insurgent and hostile Muslim nation in close proximity to British territory in India. In 1923, Ataturk tried to persuade the GNA that accepting the arbitration of the League of Nations at the Treaty of Lausanne did not signify relinquishing Mosul, but rather waiting for a time when Turkey might be stronger. Nevertheless, the artificially drawn border had an unsettling effect on the population on both sides. Later, it was claimed that Turkey began where the oil ends, as the border was drawn by the British geophysicists based on locations of oil reserves. Ataturk did not want this separation. To address Ataturk's concerns, the British Foreign Secretary George Curzon attempted to disclaim the existence of oil in the Mosul area. On the 23rd of January 1923, Curzon argued that the existence of oil was no more than hypothetical. However, according to the biographer H.C. Armstrong, England wanted Mosul and its oil. The Kurds were the key to Mosul and the oil of Iraq. While 3 inspectors from the League of Nations Committee were sent to the region to oversee the situation in 1924, the Sheikh Zayed Rebellion 1924–1927 set out to establish a new government positioned to cut Turkey's link to Mesopotamia. The relationship between the rebels and Britain was investigated. In fact, British assistance was sought after the rebels decided that the rebellion could not stand by itself. In 1925, the League of Nations formed a 3-member committee to study the case while the Sheikh Zayed Rebellion was on the rise. Partly because of the continuing uncertainties along the northern frontier, present-day northern Iraq, the committee recommended that the region should be connected to Iraq with the condition that the UK would hold the British Mandate of Mesopotamia. By the end of March 1925, the necessary troop movements were completed, and the whole area of the Sheikh Zayed Rebellion was encircled. As a result of these maneuvers, the revolt was put down. Britain, Iraq, and Ataturk made a treaty on the 5th of June 1926, which mostly followed the decisions of the League Council. The agreement left a large section of the Kurdish population and the Iraqi Turkmen on the non-Turkish side of the border. In his 26 April 1920 message to Vladimir Lenin, the Bolshevik leader and head of the Russian SFSR's government, Ataturk promised to coordinate his military operations with the Bolsheviks' fight against imperialist governments and requested 5 million lira in gold as well as armaments as first aid to his forces. In 1920 alone, the Lenin government supplied the Kemalists with 6,000 rifles, over 5 million rifle cartridges, 17,600 projectiles as well as 200.6 kilograms of gold bullion. In the subsequent 2 years, the amount of aid increased. In March 1921, the GNA representatives in Moscow signed the Treaty of Moscow Friendship and Brotherhood Treaty with Soviet Russia, which was a major diplomatic breakthrough for the Kemalists. The Treaty of Moscow, followed by the identical Treaty of Kars in October the same year, gave Turkey a favorable settlement of its northeastern frontier at the expense of the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic, then nominally an independent state. Relations between the two countries were friendly but were based on the fact that they were against a common enemy, Britain and the West. In 1920, Ataturk toyed with the idea of using a state-controlled Turkish Communist Party to forestall the perceived spread of communist ideas in the country and gain access to the Comintern's financing. Despite his relations with the Soviet Union, Ataturk was not willing to commit Turkey to communism. Friendship with Russia, he said, is not to adopt their ideology of communism for Turkey. Moreover, Ataturk declared, communism is a social issue. Social conditions, religion, and national traditions of our country confirm the opinion that Russian communism is not applicable in Turkey. And in a speech on the 1st of November 1924, he said, our amicable relations with our old friend the Soviet Russian Republic are developing and progressing every day. As in past, our Republican government regards genuine and extensive good relations with Soviet Russia as the keystone of our foreign policy. After the Turks withdrew their delegation from Geneva on the 16th of December 1925, they left the League of Nations Council to grant a mandate for the Mosul region to Britain without their consent. Ataturk countered by concluding a non-aggression pact with the USSR on the 17th of December. In 1935, the pact was prolonged for another 10 years. In 1933, the Soviet Defense Minister Kliment Voroshilov visited Turkey and attended the 10th-year celebrations of the Republic. Ataturk explained his position regarding the realization of his plan for a Balkan Federation economically uniting Turkey, Greece, Romania, Yugoslavia and Bulgaria. During the second half of the 1930s, Ataturk tried to establish a closer relationship with Britain and other major Western powers, which caused displeasure on the part of the Soviets. The second edition of the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, Volume 20, 1953, was unequivocally critical of Ataturk's policies in the last years of his rule, calling his domestic policies anti-popular and his foreign course as aimed at rapprochement with the imperialist powers. The post-war leader of Greece, Eleftherios Venizelos, was also determined to establish normal relations between his country and Turkey. The war had devastated Western Anatolia, and the financial burden of Ottoman Muslim refugees from Greece blocked rapprochement. Venizelos moved forward with an agreement with Turkey, despite accusations of conceding too much on the issues of naval armaments and the properties of Ottoman Greeks from Turkey. In spite of Turkish animosity against the Greeks, Ataturk resisted the pressures of historic enmities and was sensitive towards past tensions. At one point, he ordered the removal of a painting showing a Turkish soldier plunging his bayonet into a Greek soldier by stating, "What a revolting scene." Greece renounced all its claims over Turkish territory, and the two sides concluded an agreement on the 30th of April 1930. On the 25th of October, Venizelos visited Turkey and signed a treaty of friendship. Venizelos even forwarded Ataturk's name for the 1934 Nobel Peace Prize. Even after Venizelos' fall from power, Greco-Turkish relations remained cordial. Indeed, Venizelos' successor Panagis Saldaris came to visit Ataturk in September 1933 and signed a more comprehensive agreement called the Entente Cordiale between Greece and Turkey, which was a stepping stone for the Balkan Pact. Greek Premier Ioannis Metaxas once stated, with regard to Ataturk, that Greece, which has the highest estimation of the renowned leader, heroic soldier, and enlightened creator of Turkey. We will never forget that President Ataturk was the true founder of the Turkish-Greek alliance based on a framework of common ideals and peaceful cooperation. He developed ties of friendship between the two nations which it would be unthinkable to dissolve. Greece will guard its fervent memories of this great man, who determined an unalterable future path for the noble Turkish nation. From 1919, Afghanistan was in the midst of a reformation period under Amanullah Khan. Afghan Foreign Minister Mahmoud Tarzi was a follower of Ataturk's domestic policy. Tarzi encouraged Amanullah Khan in social and political reform but urged that reforms should build on a strong government. During the late 1920s, Anglo-Afghan relations soured over British fears of an Afghan-Soviet friendship. On the 20th of May 1928, Anglo-Afghan politics gained a positive perspective when Amanullah Khan and his wife, Queen Soraya Tarzi, were received by Ataturk in Istanbul. This meeting was followed by a Turkey-Afghanistan Friendship and Cooperation Pact on the 22nd of May 1928. Ataturk supported Afghanistan's integration into international organizations. In 1934, Afghanistan's relations with the international community improved significantly when it joined the League of Nations. Mahmoud Tarzi received Ataturk's personal support until he died on the 22nd of November 1933 in Istanbul. Ataturk and Reza Shah, leader of Iran, had a common approach regarding British imperialism and its influence in their countries, resulting in a slow but continuous rapprochement between Ankara and Tehran. Both governments sent diplomatic missions and messages of friendship to each other during the Turkish War of Independence. The policy of the Ankara government in this period was to give moral support in order to reassure Iranian independence and territorial integrity. The relations between the two countries were strained after the abolishment of the Caliphate. Iran's Shia clergy did not accept Ataturk's stance, and Iranian religious power centers perceived the real motive behind Ataturk's reforms was to undermine the power of the clergy. By the mid-1930s, Reza Shah's efforts had upset the clergy throughout Iran, thus widening the gap between religion and government. As Russia and Great Britain strengthened their holds in the Middle East, Ataturk feared the occupation and dismemberment of Iran as a multi-ethnic society by these European powers. Like Ataturk, Reza Shah wanted to secure Iran's borders, and in 1934, the Shah visited Ataturk. In 1935, The draft of what would become the Treaty of Sadabad was paragraphed in Geneva, but its signing was delayed due to the border dispute between Iran and Iraq. On the 8th of July 1937, Turkey, Iraq, Iran and Afghanistan signed the Sadabad Pact at Tehran. The signatories agreed to preserve their common frontiers, to consult together in all matters of common interest, and to commit no aggression against one another's territory. The treaty united the Afghan king Zahir Shah's call for greater Oriental Middle Eastern cooperation, Reza Shah's goal in securing relations with Turkey that would help free Iran from Soviet and British influence, and Ataturk's foreign policy of ensuring stability in the region. The treaty's immediate outcome, however, was deterring Italian leader Mussolini from interfering in the Middle East. On the 24th of July 1923, the Treaty of Lausanne included the Lausanne Straits Agreement. The Lausanne Straits Agreement stated that the Dardanelles should remain open to all commercial vessels. Seizure of foreign military vessels was subject to certain limitations during peacetime, and, even as a neutral state, Turkey could not limit any military passage during wartime. The Lausanne Straits Agreement stated that the waterway was to be demilitarized and its management left to the Straits Commission. The demilitarized zone heavily restricted Turkey's domination and sovereignty over the straits, and the defense of Istanbul was impossible without sovereignty over the water that passed through it. In March 1936, Hitler's reoccupation of the Rhineland gave Ataturk the opportunity to resume full control over the straits. The situation in Europe, Ataturk declared, is highly appropriate for such a move. We shall certainly achieve it. Tevfik Rustu Aras, Turkey's foreign minister, initiated a move to revise the straits regime. Aras claimed that he was directed by Ataturk, rather than the Prime Minister, İsmet İnönü. İnönü was worried about harming relations with Britain, France, and Balkan neighbors over the straits. However, the signatories of the Treaty of Lausanne agreed to join the conference, since unlimited military passage had become unfavorable to Turkey with the changes in world politics. Ataturk demanded that the members of the Turkish Foreign Office devise a solution that would transfer full control of the waterway to Turkey. On the 20th of July 1936, the Montreux Convention was signed by Bulgaria, Great Britain, Australia, France, Japan, Romania, the Soviet Union, Turkey, Yugoslavia, and Greece. It became the primary instrument governing the passage of commercial and war vessels through the Dardanelles Strait. The agreement was ratified by the NAT on the 31st of July 1936 and went into effect on the 9th of November 1936. Until the early 1930s, Turkey followed a neutral foreign policy with the West by developing joint friendship and neutrality agreements. These bilateral agreements aligned with Ataturk's worldview. By the end of 1925, Turkey had signed 15 joint agreements with Western states. In the early 1930s, changes and developments in world politics required Turkey to make multilateral agreements to improve its security. Ataturk strongly believed that close cooperation between the Balkan states based on the principle of equality would have an important effect on European politics. These states had been ruled by the Ottoman Empire for centuries and had proved to be a powerful force. While the origins of the Balkan Agreement may date as far back as 1925, the Balkan Pact came into being in the mid-1930s. Several important developments in Europe helped the original idea materialize, such as improvements in the Turkish-Greek alliance and the rapprochement between Bulgaria and Yugoslavia. The most important factor in driving Turkish foreign policy from the mid-1930s onwards was the fear of Italy. Benito Mussolini had frequently proclaimed his intention to place the entire Mediterranean under Italian control. Both the Turks and the various Balkan states felt threatened by Italian ambitions. The Balkan Pact was negotiated by Ataturk with Greece, Romania, and Yugoslavia. This mutual defense agreement intended to guarantee the signatories' territorial integrity and political independence against attack from another Balkan state such as Bulgaria or Albania. It countered the increasingly aggressive foreign policy of fascist Italy and the effect of a potential Bulgarian alignment with Nazi Germany. Ataturk thought of the Balkan Pact as a medium of balance in Turkey's relations with the European countries. He was particularly anxious to establish a region of security and alliances to the west of Turkey in Europe, which the Balkan Pact helped achieve. I stop at this point today. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep exploring the world's incredible stories. Soon we will publish Part 5. Thank you for watching.